Opportunities don't show up just because we're lucky. They show up because we have clarity about exactly what we want. If you don't tell your brain where you want to go, it can't get you there. You're watching the Wow podcast. I'm Jennifer Robin. This conversation is for informational purposes only and is not medical advice. Full disclosure is in the description. Today, I'm going to walk you through the key ideas from my recent interview with Pat Schultz, the founder of Ready for Takeoff and the author of Her Unseen Battle. Unfortunately, we had some tech issues during the episode, but this information is important and I wanted to share it with you. Why our brains work against us. Pat shared something that I think is incredibly freeing once you really understand it. Your brain is not wired for success or happiness. It's wired for safety. Boo. Your brain's number one job is to keep you alive. It doesn't care if you're fulfilled, confident, or living your purpose. Safe, familiar, and predictable is what it prefers, even if that means that you stay frustrated or stuck. This explains why we often don't do the very things we know would help us grow. Pat explained that when we think about doing something that's unfamiliar or scary, our amygdala, the brain's fear center, sounds the alarm. Danger, danger, danger. And then when we back away from that thing, the brain actually rewards us with dopamine, and we feel good. We feel relief. So without realizing it, we're reinforcing the idea that avoidance equals safety. So fear isn't really the problem. It's rarely the obstacle itself that keeps us stuck. It's our fear response to the obstacle. When that fear shows up, we assume it means that we shouldn't proceed. But fear is often just a signal that something's unfamiliar, not unsafe. Pat talked about how important it is to say to yourself, hey, I'm afraid, but there's no real danger here. There's no saber-toothed tiger, just some discomfort, uncertainty, or, the possibility that I might get embarrassed. And when you do the thing anyway and realize that you're still alive, you made it, you start teaching your brain a new story. We also talked about what happens if you do that scary thing and it doesn't turn out the way you hoped. Pat says that interpretation is everything. If you try something, feel embarrassed, and tell yourself, see, I knew it, I shouldn't have done that, you strengthen the old neural pathway in your brain. But instead, if you say, okay, that didn't go perfectly, but you know what? I survived, and next time I'm going to do it differently. Well, if you do that, then you start building new neural pathways. Pretty cool, huh? Same experience, completely different outcome in the brain. So let's talk about two key parts of the brain, the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. Pat explained that the amygdala reacts instantly. It's super fast, emotional, and designed for survival. The prefrontal cortex is where our rational thinking, planning, and decision-making happen, and it's slower. And this is why simple practices like pausing, breathing, or even counting to 10 before responding or reacting to something actually work. That pause gives the amygdala time to calm down, and it allows the prefrontal cortex to step in and say, hey, this isn't actually dangerous. Cool it. Calm down. Pat shared that we don't have control over the fear response firing, but we do have control over what happens next. And when we pause instead of reacting, we interrupt that knee-jerk fear response, and then we can make a more empowered choice. This is especially important when our modern fears just involve things like getting rejected or being visible or not doing something perfectly. Pat says that neuroplasticity is your superpower. And what does that mean? Neuroplasticity? It just means that your brain has the ability to rewire itself by creating new neural pathways and weakening the old ones. That old saying, you can't teach an old dog new tricks, is just not true. Your brain can learn, adapt, and reinvent itself your entire life, which means it's never too late to try something new. And here's the key point Pat emphasized. Trying new things is actually the most effective way to change those neural pathways in the brain. Every time you do something new, even something really, really small, you're literally teaching your brain, I can do new things and I am safe. And that repeated experience is what's going to rewire the brain. Pat also emphasized that transformation doesn't require giant leaps. Small steps are actually more powerful from a neuroscience perspective because they don't overwhelm the fear response. When you take one small step and survive it, your brain updates its data and says, okay, this is safe. Pat shared an example of a client who was terrified of networking. Instead of forcing herself to attend big events, she started visiting smaller gatherings with like 10 to 20 people and had the goal to just speak to one person. By doing that, she began to see herself differently, not as someone who can't network, but as someone who can network. We also talked about journaling, which you know I love. Pat shared that writing things down strengthens those neural pathways because it encourages thought, language, and emotion all at once. When you write about what you did, the new thing you tried, what worked, how you survived, you reinforce that new story that your brain is learning. And one of my favorite brain concepts we discussed is the reticular activating system. And you all know I call that the RAS, like razzmatazz, because it's hard to say. Tons of data comes into our body every microsecond through all our senses. And if our brain was trying to process all of that and make us aware of it, you're sitting in the chair, you hear the heater blowing, you're feeling the heat of the sunlight through the window. There's just too much data, and your RAS kind of dulls what it thinks you don't think is important so that you're not overwhelmed. So it only shows us what it thinks that we think is important. Pat actually describes the RAS as your brain's GPS. When you get clear about what you want, your RAS starts filtering the people and opportunities and ideas that can help you get there. And these seem to jump out at you. And Pat made an important point here. Opportunities don't show up just because we're lucky. They show up because we have clarity about exactly what we want. If you don't tell your brain where you want to go, it can't get you there. Pat learned that her mother had a dream of retiring in the Caribbean, but she passed away and never got to do that. And that became a wake-up call for Pat to keep moving toward her mission to help women over 40 realize that it's never too late to go after your dreams. Pat attended a transformational speaker summit when she was 67 years old, but she almost didn't go. She worried that it cost too much. She didn't want to travel. She was worried about her age, her appearance, and all the other limiting beliefs. But she went anyway. At that event, she met a mentor who helped her take the next steps. And since then, she's become an Amazon bestselling author, spoken on larger stages, and is now working on her second book. And all of that traced back to that one decision. And I could relate to that because my mom wrote in her journals that she wanted to be an art therapist. She was an artist, and this dream showed up again and again over decades. We even looked into programs when she was in her late 50s, but she got stuck in the belief that she was too old and that the program would take too long, and she never did it. After she passed, that stayed with me. And it's one of the reasons this podcast even exists today, because this was one of my dreams. I didn't want to reach the end of my life knowing that I never tried. It's never too late, right? Pat shared that for many women that are over 40, what holds us back isn't a lack of ability. It's decades of ingrained beliefs about who we're supposed to be. But those beliefs are not fixed. Neuroplasticity is real, and we can change our programming. And sometimes all it takes is one small decision to do something anyway. If there's one thing I hope you take away from today, it's this: fear doesn't mean stop. It usually means something new is trying to emerge. Your brain can learn, your confidence can grow, and it's never too late to begin. If you'd like to work with Pat, she offers online courses with weekly coaching calls, either in a group or privately, at I'mReadyForTakeoff.com. Thanks for watching. Let me know what your biggest takeaway was. Just drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more.